What's up, scientists? It's Mr. Rambo coming at you with more science. Today, we have three things on the schedule. First, we'll go over your hypotheses or your guesses in your investigation. Next, we'll talk about identifying your variables for your online simulation investigation. Lastly, we will talk about your control group, again, in your investigation. In terms of our goals, we will identify the independent, dependent, and control variables in your virtual investigation. And secondly, identify experimental and control groups also in your investigation. To do these things, of course, we first need access to the online simulation, the online experiment, so that we can actually look at what this looks like. And we must also gain access to our project worksheet titled Plant Resources. If you do not have access to something that looks like this on my screen, pause this video and let me know ASAP. Your Do Now is attached to the announcement under the title Do Now Controlled Experiment Hypotheses. All I'm asking you to do is to type in your hypothesis. For example, as I showed yesterday and last week, my investigation question is, how does the amount of water affect plant growth and mass? Because I wanted to investigate how the resource of water affected how much a tomato plant grows. So my appropriate hypothesis, as indicated in this Do Now, is word by word, and let's stick to the if-then statements. So, for example, if I increase the amount of water per day, so that means, and I may reword this, that the amount of water per day is at a high level, then the plant will grow more in height and mass. Essentially, if my tomato plant gets more water, then it will grow more in height and mass. One rule of thumb, keep it simple, silly. Also an acronym for KISS. Once you're finished with your Do Now, make sure to look at everyone's responses so you can compare, contrast, and reflect and revise your own hypothesis. Now, let's take a look at your two things that you took out today. First, the online virtual simulation of the experiment, and second, your project plant resources worksheet. I will upload my own worksheet as a model for you to reflect off, not to copy. If you copy any of this, I am not giving you the grade, but so that you can reflect and see how our responses compare. Today on my screen, you'll be completing day 2. Obviously, it's day 2, so we're going to go ahead and complete the activities for day 2. And those, if you can read my screen, is identifying my variables and my different experimental and control groups. As we know, the independent variable is the variable or factor or thing that we change on purpose. Here in my model, in my experiment that you cannot copy, I am changing on purpose the amount of water, daily water, that my tomato plant receives. So I go ahead and copy that in number 4, move on to the next one, dependent variable. We know that the dependent variable is the variable or factor or thing that we measure in our experiments. Here, if you look at the data tab of your Gizmo simulation, you can see that I can do plant height and mass. And that's exactly what I'm, you guessed it, measuring, making it my dependent variable. So specificity, being as descriptive as you can, details, 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 is important for science. So for number 5, I put the height and mass of the tomato plant after 50 days of growing. Number 5 asks you, what are the controlled or control variables in your control experiment? From last week, if we need a reminder, controls or controlled variables is everything else outside of your IV, your independent, and your DV, your dependent variables. And those are the things in your experiment that stay the same, which is everything else. This includes, for me, the number of light bulbs on, all 3 of them are on, the pot, the type of pot, they're all the same. The type of seed that I'm using is a tomato seed for all of them is the same, which is a control variable. I'm using fertilizer and compost for all of them, the same amount of fertilizer and compost for each pot. They're all the same distance between the sun or the light bulbs, which is very important. That has to stay the same as well. So as you can already figure out, there are a ton of control variables, even to the type of water. And those are held at the same for each thing that each pot that I'm testing. So in my model, I listed as many as I could, the type of seed, the amount of light, the soil. Go ahead and read it at your own leisure. They are the things that stay the same. They have to stay the same for each pot you test. Why? Because we only want to change one thing. We just want to change the thing we're choosing to investigate. You chose a resource to investigate, whether that be the amount of light, the amount of water, the type of plant seed, just one thing. And you're measuring whether that be height, weight, whatever, you're measuring an outcome based on your manipulation of that one variable, which is your independent variable. So in short, control variables make sure that we're measuring just the one thing and not anything else is affecting the thing that we're measuring. So I cannot say if I hold everything the same and just change the amount of water, daily water, I cannot say, hey, maybe it was the light that changed the plant height and mass. No, because I didn't change the amount of light each plant received. In my experiment, I changed the amount of daily water. That's it. So obviously for number 7, for my experiment, my experimental group are the pots with different amounts of daily water. That's what I'm experimenting in. That's what I want to figure out. If there's an effect of the amount of water that I put daily in the pot and the height and mass it grows. Specifically, I want to make sure that my hypothesis is right. My hypothesis, remember previously, my hypothesis, if I increase daily water, then the plant will grow more in height and mass. So number 8, the thing I think we will trip up most, what is my control group? My control group, of course, is a pot with no water. You will not have the same control group. I guarantee it 100%. But now you must understand why it's my control group so you can find your control group correctly. The control group is not affected by your independent variable. It is not. It is not affected by the thing you're changing on purpose. That is why my pot, my control group is a pot of no water. No water is not me changing the daily amounts of water, because no water, if you can read it down here, means the absence of water. It is not the same as changing the amount of daily water, because there is no water to change. It's simply nothing. And remember, we have control groups to make sure that your IV is really causing the DV and nothing else. So like the control variables with the control group, I can say, hey, it's the water that's making the changes in the plant height and mass, the tomato plant height and mass, not the amount of sun they're receiving, not the fertilizer and the compost. It's only the different amounts of water. And if you read that this means with my control group, if no water, the pot with no water, the absence of water produces no result in height and weight, and different amounts of water, my experimental group shows different results in height and weight, then I can factually say, at that point, I can say, hey, the amount of daily water does have an effect on height and weight. And I can only say this if I have a control group. I can only say this with a pot with no water. A pot with no water will tell me that my independent variable changing the amount of water, daily water, does affect the plant height and mass. Read this screen again if that doesn't make sense, or rewind this video, but you need to know why the control group is there. And once you're done thinking through your experiment using the gizmo simulation and these mind thoughts, then you are done for today's activities. Before that, make sure to complete your exit by 3:30 p.m. Exit is just 2 questions or 3 questions. What's your IV? What's your DV? And name 3 control variables in it. And there you have it. We completed day 1, which was designing our hypotheses or our educated guesses about the relationships in our experiment. And also day 2, defining and determining our variables and different groups in our experiment. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. Keep those scientist caps on, and always make sure to ask questions. Reach out to me individually if you're stuck or need help in any of these questions. Take care.